A couple years ago, the Mint Museum had a think tank here that was sponsored by the Chipstone Foundation out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it was after they had completed the Uptown Charlotte building, and they were having sort of a brainstorming session on what they could do with this building here, and maybe have some more ceramic shows. And I guess at that point, one of the ideas was to do more frequent rotations in this room. And I was a part of that think tank, and so that was when I got to know Annie a little bit more, and Rebecca. And so I think that's sort of part of the reason they asked me to help on this installation. Anyways, one of the great things of doing this project was just the opportunity to spend a lot of time down in the basement of the Mint, looking through all the old pots, and then also to sort of go through the online archives and look at literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images. One of the other things I really liked, I came here unannounced one day and just sort of had time to go through all the different galleries in the building just on my own and look at things. And I think I spent a lot of time in the Ancient America Gallery and the African Gallery, in part because there's a lot of ceramics in those rooms, and it was really great to be able to go in there and look at these pots in comparison to really closely related pots from the same time period, the same place. I think you can tell, you can learn a lot about pots by comparing and contrasting them to very similar examples. Obviously, this show is the complete opposite of that. And so we chose to bring pots from all over the world together in one room and try to show their similarities with North Carolina pots. And I'm not sure that one approach is better than the other. Mixing them all together like this or having them separate. I don't think it's a matter of one being better than the other. I think we all just learn different things from both approaches. So that was basically the concept for the show. And so what I was going to do today is just sort of walk around the room and talk about the pots and the pairings and the people that made them, because I know almost all these people. Many of them are close friends. Others are just sort of acquaintances. And, but anyways, I would prefer to do this as sort of a conversation. So I can start to talk about these pots, but at any point, if you have any questions, please just speak up. And looking at the pots, I guess there is one other thing I should tell you. There's about 25, all the contemporary North Carolina pots in this room. There are about 25 of them. They were all purchased at the Potter's Invitational over the past 12 years. So those pots, I was required to use those pots in this show. They were a given. So really my part of it was to pick the pots from around the world that would pair well with those. And there were a lot of pots that featured animals and plants. And I think that's sort of what this first grouping is about. This pot is made by Kyle Carpenter. He's a young potter from Asheville, North Carolina, who's very gifted with a brush. You can see the bird. It's almost like an Audubon drawing or something. It's very, very realistic. It's also a salt glazed piece, which is salt glazed stoneware is a high temperature clay where you fire the kiln to a higher temperature, then throw some salt into the kiln, common table salt, and it bonds with the silica in the clay and makes sort of a transparent glaze. So there's no applied glaze to that pot. It's just sort of a chemical reaction that happens in the kiln. And this is Ken Sidbury. He's a potter from the Penland area of North Carolina, which of course is a really important center for not only North Carolina ceramics, but it's really an international craft school. It's been important for a lot of the people in this room. I've been there both as a student and a teacher, so it's a great place. This is Julie Wiggins. She's a Charlotte potter.
And coming to speak in January.
Sorry?
And she's coming to again to speak in January.
Oh, she is. I didn't know that. Yeah, she came to the North Carolina Pottery Center in my home county, Seagrove, just a couple of months ago, so I heard her speak there. She's really great. She's involved in all different kinds of projects. I know she's just now getting back from China, and this is her second trip to Shenzhen, which is the Chinese porcelain capital. And so, I might have to come down to that, because I'm sure she's going to have some new things to think about. This is a neighbor of mine, Crystal King, from Seagrove, and Crystal comes from a family of potters, and I think Crystal would consider herself a folk artist, I think. I think the lion is related to the biblical story of Samson and the lion. I think maybe you all know more about that than I do. I think that's the inspiration for this piece. This is by another neighbor of mine, Carol Gentithis, and this is more of a political kind of piece. I think I see George Bush down here. This was 2010. Anyways, it's sort of hard to see without seeing the backside of it, but there's lots of different political characters on this piece. Yeah. This is Turtle Island potter. This is a pot from Costa Rica. It's Jaguar pots. In fact, both of these pots are Jaguar. This one's from Peru. This one's from Costa Rica. I think the Jaguars were really important symbolism for pre-Columbian artists.
And royalty.
Excuse me?
And royalty.
King. Like oftentimes they would wear Jaguar costumes. I think the Jaguar, since it was both a nocturnal and a day animal.
And swims. So
and they swim, so
yeah. The three realms of the universe.
Exactly. I mean, they were in this life and then also the afterlife. Please tell me more about it.
Well, we used to do a Dick's tour, so pre-Columbian art was the basis for it. So we did a lot of studying of jaguars and their folk art. So
They believe that the jaguar led the sun down at night.
Yeah, because of the skin.
Right.
They're going through transformation if they're smiling from animal to God.
Right. And it was also the largest predator in their world.
Yes.
Sort of in the same way that the lion would have been the largest predator.
And we like to compare them to the panthers.
Huh? Anyways, moving on down. See, these two pots, the tall candlestick is made by Vernon Owens of Jugtown Pottery. Vernon's actually a teacher of mine. I've worked for him for almost 5 years, and so it was great to be able to include him in this show. It was actually a pair of candlesticks, but I'm glad they only used one. It actually looks really nice, and it's paired with this ancient American pot, sort of on a form level, because they're both sort of on pedestals. It's sort of a pedestal form. Vernon's pot is earthenware, which is a very low temperature, and it's also glazed with lead, which is it's one of the most beautiful glazes potters can use. Of course, when it's on something like a candlestick like that, it's completely safe, because there's always been a problem with lead glazes. If you eat or drink something acidic out of them, you can get lead poisoning. But of course, with something like a candlestick, it doesn't matter so much. This is Nick Jorling. His picture is paired with, let's see here, a Bolivian picture. And anyways, so these two pots are sort of paired together by function, I guess. And, yeah, it's a handmade thing, and so
it makes it more interesting.
I mean, this is a very difficult shape to make. I think Vernon's one of the best at making it. And anyways, he just makes them on one piece on the wheel, pulls it up, necks it into that thin shape, and then just picks it off the wheel wet with his hands. Whereas I think most people would, of course, throw that on a wooden base where they can lift it off very carefully and it wouldn't warp or anything. You know, Vernon is just a very skilled potter, and that kind of thing, it probably wouldn't have, it wouldn't bother him at all, I don't think. And for me, it sort of does add sort of more attention to the piece or something, maybe. Good eye. Yeah. Anyways, I think these two pots are sort of my favorite pots in the whole show, in a way. I mean, this is a Chinese pot, and this is a Mexican pot. The Mexican pot's from 1500, and the Chinese pot is, you know, a couple thousand years old. So there's a couple thousands of years difference between those two pots. And they're made on different sides of the world, but they're obviously very, very similar pots in mood and in shape. You know, they're both ovoid pots with paired double handles and slip decorated. So I think in many ways those two pots sort of show what we're trying to communicate with this exhibition in a way.
David,
Yes.
have you figured out whether they were both done with the same techniques?
I think they were both done with the coiling techniques. So even though they're very symmetrical and round, I think they were not made on a wheel. They were just built up with coils of clay.
Have you figured out how two cultures that far apart at that point would kind of
Arrive at the same
Yeah,
conclusion.
yeah.
And
no,
then,
it's-
they do it in the Southwest too. I mean, it's all over the
Yeah,
world.
and the
These
emphasis with
pots are
I think,
coil made.
I think part of it is, I think it's probably a materials-based answer.
Okay.
I mean, that shape is just one of the shapes that happens really naturally when you use clay. Just sort of starting with a smaller base and then expanding and then coming back in for a neck like that. And they're also both decorated with slip. So slip is basically just different colors of clay that you would paint on the pot after it was partly dry.
When was the wheel invented, or
When was it invented?
first known pottery?
I think it was like 1,000 or so years before Christ. It would have been
In what?
in the Middle East, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then spread throughout Asia.
I saw in Taiwan at the National Museum, I saw a piece that could only have been thrown on a wheel that was
Right.
almost 2000 BC.
Almost 2,000 years.
Almost,
Yeah,
almost 2,000
Yeah,
BC.
yeah. I
Why
love
do you
those
say it had to be on the wheel?
those early
Well,
pots.
the way, I mean, it was,
You can see the throwing
Yeah,
marks on the
right.
inside or something. Yeah, some of those early Greek pots, just Cypriot pots, it's really obvious that this was a new technology for them, that it had just recently been invented because the pots are just so full of life, it seems like. And it's just, this particular piece is pretty old. It's, 1974. I mean, it's not old, but compared to this.
So, is that the first PMI then? One of the first?
This is, no, PMI's only been going for 12 years.
Oh, okay.
So this one, I think it was bought, what did it say here? Yeah, it was purchased in 1976 biannual exhibition of Piedmont crafts, which I think is a show in Winston-Salem.
Yes, it is. Piedmont craft.
Anyways, he'll be at the PMI this year along with his wife Barbara, who's also a ceramic artist, and they're both making really great work. I mean, they're at sort of the prime of their creative lives, I think. And what Roy is making now is completely different than this. I mean, you wouldn't even realize it was the same person. I don't think. A lot of the pieces that he makes now are related to the Holocaust and other Jewish issues, I think. Anyways, when I was pairing these pots together, that was one that really worried me a lot. I just couldn't, it's such a personal and unique pot, I couldn't figure out how I could find something else to pair with it, but that was what I ended up with. in part because they both have sort of an over-the-top looping handle.
Geometric.
And then they're also, yeah, both just sort of geometric shapes with this over-looping handle. So they're paired together basically just on visually, just on form. Yes. Right, so these, there's a couple different teapots in the show. This is Terry Guess. He's also a Penland potter. He teaches at one of the community colleges out in the western part of the state. I forget which one. Andrew Macy, he says he works in Asheville here. This is one of the few contemporary potters in the show that I don't know. So I can't tell you anything about him really, other than it's a teapot, but it's obviously sort of a sculptural teapot.
Yeah, all his forms are like pipes, connecting pipes, his
Yeah.
style right now, and then using metallics to make it trembloid kind of
Yep.
like that. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, the word that I think about when I think about his work is steampunk.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like that. And, anyways, I'll look him up
He's
this
young.
year. Is he young?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
In his 20s.
Anyways, I paired the two teapots with this double-spouted vessel from Peru. And this is one of the pots that I actually didn't see in person until today. Most of the pots I saw in person, but some were chosen through the digital archives. And so, for some reason, I was thinking this piece was twice as big as it is, but it's a great pot. So these three pots were sort of chosen to go together as bottle or jug-like forms. This is from Kim Ellington, who's a great friend of mine from the Catawba Valley style of pottery where they use this distinctive alkaline glaze. Alkaline glaze, in this case, is a mixture of wood ashes, clay, and feldspar. Kim was a student of Berlin Craig, who was sort of the man who revitalized and sort of saved the Catawba Valley style. And Kim's sort of doing the same now. He started a program at the local community college teaching this style. And anyways, these two Peruvian pots, bottle forms, just sort of go along with that. Let's see, maybe we should walk down to the other end. It's a special piece, or Pam Owens. So Pam is Vernon's wife. She's also one of the co-owners of Jugtown Pottery. The lid, the silver lid on this jar is actually made by her sister, Jenny Keats, who's a jeweler, and they all often collaborate on different things. I think it's the only non-ceramic thing in the room. But, anyways, yeah, instead of what you were saying, if you would see a photograph of that pot with no indication of what size it was, it could easily be a gigantic pot, And she makes gigantic pots too. So, yeah. And then Akira, he's a really interesting guy. He lives in Asheville or Swannanoa now. He was born in Osaka. Yeah, he's a brilliant banjo player. And anyways, he moved to New York at some point several decades ago and became involved in the music industry there, not only as a player, but as a record producer. And he was a producer on many famous albums, as well. Also, he was involved in the sort of commercial side of music, where he would, I think, make music for TV commercials and just everything. He had a staff of about 50 people working for him in New York City, so it was a major operation.
And he wasn't doing pottery.
He was not doing pottery at that point, so he had some kind of a midlife thing, a burnout thing, and started studying pottery as a middle-aged person. And I think did a very personal, very intense study of it, particularly Japanese pottery. And at that point, he relocated to the Asheville area. And he's at the PMI almost every year. This is Liz Zott Summerfield. She is a Penland potter. She's also one of the potters that I really don't know. I think I've just met her once. And so I look forward
Also
to
young.
Is she young?
Yes.
Okay. But obviously it fits really well in
Yeah.
this display of very small pots. These pots are Chinese, except for, I guess they're all Chinese. Let's see. They are. They're all Chinese pots. And I think that one, the small jar would be a jar to keep powdered tea in probably. And so it's sort of related to Pan's jar. And, this one sort of has a locust leaf design on the inside, which is, it's actually a motif that Daniel Johnson uses a lot on his big pots, but not on the big one of his that we have here. Anyways, it's a popular design. Any questions on these small pots? Okay. So these pots are from the Whalens, and again, yeah, I don't know Jim and Susan Whalen, and these were two pots that I was also having some trouble pairing them with pots from the collection. So so we ended up pairing them with these Native American pots, basically on sort of a form idea.
This one looks like it could be wood. I mean, it really
It does look like it's wood.
a
It's
ceramic
also
pot.
one of the ones that's featured on the advertisement for this show, so I think everybody
Yeah, it's
responds to
really
that one a
lovely.
lot. It's actually a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. It was-
How does this glaze come about?
Good question. I don't know. This is
Who is it?
earthenware. So yeah, I'm thinking.
I mean, it looks like horsehair, but not.
Yeah, it looks like horsehair raccoon, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not. But I'm thinking it's some kind. Yeah, it's some kind of a related process.
Sagger, yeah.
How does,
Put it
what
in.
is that?
How do you spell it? S-A-G-G-E-R.
And what does it
Sagger is
mean?
sort of a
It's a container
container.
that you put.
In this case, it might be used after they pulled out of a hot kiln and put it in a container that might be filled with some kind of combustible material like
Right.
sawdust, or sometimes they use horsehairs. But that's not, I think
That's
that,
that horsehair.
yeah, I mean, we can find out more about these pots, you know.
No, it's just-
Are you guys
I
going to
love
be
it.
around for the
Raccoons
Potter's
and
Market?
glazes.
Because you can actually go and meet these people.
Yeah, no, it's just
And,
such a lovely glaze,
yeah.
and I just
Yeah,
was
yeah.
curious because I don't know that I've ever seen anything that looks quite like that. It's almost like an old Chinese something, you know, like a chrysanthemum kind of
Then, the Native American pots, they're really not that old. They're all like mid-20th century. They're all anonymous pots, you know, unknown potters. I mean, there would have been some choices I could have made that had names and identities attached to them, but I chose to use these instead because it sort of fit with the rest of the historic pots here that weren't made by known individuals.
But they do look like iconoclasts.
They do.
So they do have that kind of.
Yeah, so you know, they're not really old,
Yeah.
but they have the patina of age to them, it seems like.
20th century isn't old, is it? But 74
It's my age.
is. Yeah,
Yes.
This looks like it's randomly done.
It's some kind of firing process,
But
yeah.
this looks like it's actually.
Oh, yeah.
How do they do this so that
So these, yeah, you know, so these pots are painted with slit.
they're actually painted?
So they're similar to the two pots over there, the Chinese and the Mexican pots that we talked about, slit painting. They're actually closely related to those
So
pots.
they use colored clay.
Colored clay,
And they
yep.
put it, as you say, very
They
carefully.
paint it,
yeah.
they paint it.
Yeah.
They draw it on with like a porcupine quills
Okay.
or hairs. That's like single brushes, and they just.
And then when they fire it, it sticks.
There's also probably a burnishing process on these pots where they would rub it with
they-
stone or maybe like the backside of a spoon or something to make it really smooth, and that also sort of seals up the surface. You know.
It makes it shiny, like gives it a nice like glow.
So again, these pots are not made on a wheel; they're hand built with coils. We have the North Carolina Pottery Conference in Seagrove every year. A number of years ago, there were some Mexican potters that came up and demonstrated for us. It was a man and a wife. The woman made the pots, and the man painted the pots. And they were both highly skilled. The man was this huge cowboy-like guy, but he could handle a brush just like you wouldn't believe. And they're all handmade brushes, I think, with dog hair. He was telling us that a certain part of the hair of the dog on the back of the neck. That makes it
No poodles, no poodles. No curly head dogs.
It's just a great thing to see this huge guy be able to wield a brush in such a way like that.
When it's level hard, it takes me a while.
Yeah, so these are all Chinese pots, and I mean, I think the Mint has had these for quite some time. I'm not sure they've ever used them on a display. They're a group of the pots that were down in the basement like that. The darker ones are a glaze that's known as Temuco, and the lighter ones are a glaze known as Celadon. So the Temuco glaze is actually a glaze that's made mostly out of just clay. So it'd be a combination of clay and feldspar, which is a mineral that potters use to sort of lower the melting point of clay so it can become a glaze. And you can see some of them have sort of decorations, like that one has sort of white spots, so someone would have actually put that on with a slip. Some of these other marks are just from the firing process. There's a lot of different variations of Temuco glaze. This one on the bottom here is really spectacular. I think it's what they call the tea dust variation, but you can see it has like lots of little sparkles in it.
It's a beautiful pot.
Yeah, they're really beautiful pots. And
Thanks for getting out.
That's
yeah, I think
So we can see them.
yeah, I think they all.
Otherwise, they might have languished down there for some time more.
I mean, they might have been used at some point, but there are other Chinese pots that they had.
I've seen it here or something similar.
Well, Julie Wiggins does that with her.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of contemporary potters use variations on that. And so Celadon glaze, again, it would be a glaze that would be made up with clay, feldspar, and in this case also wood ashes, probably. The wood ashes would be the flux. The flux is the material that lowers the temperature, the maturing temperature of the materials in the glazes. Any questions on these?
Do we know who came up with the Celadon first? The Chinese?
I think the Chinese did first, but then it quickly spread to Korea, and then of course Japan and all over Asia. I mean, that's sort of the normal progression for ceramic information in Asia. It would have been developed in China, sort of southern China, then spread down through the Korean peninsula, and then finally to Japan.
Think of Korea.
Our African pots from Nigeria, they're Nube pots. And so it's this one and those two. This one is from a different place. I'm not exactly sure where. Anyways, the Nube people, they were from northern Nigeria. So it's sort of the same part of the world where there's big trouble now. And they would have been made by Muslim women. And I've always just really loved these pots just for the form of them, actually. Particularly ones like this are closely related to many forms that I make, and I thought it was closely related to this form, which is from Josh Coates. He lives sort of a little bit west of Asheville, up in the mountains. And he's a young guy, he's an up-and-comer, North Carolina pottery. This is Donna Craven. She's a neighbor of mine in Seagrove. She lives, well, sort of in Asheboro, right across the street from the North Carolina Zoo, I think. And she, again, makes pots of all different sizes. She's known for large pots. Has anybody ever met Donna?
Yes.
She's maybe this big. And so making big pots is not a matter of strength, it's a matter of technique. And Willie said, she's got plenty of that. She's got plenty of that. And she's just a very dedicated person that sort of a hero to many people, I think. Anyways, these pots would have been built up gradually with coils of clay. In fact, all the big pots on this table, on this area, would have been built up with coils of clay. This is Daniel Johnson.
Coils of clay, you need to join thrown pieces, or they're not?
No coils of clay.
They're coiled, these are coiled.
They're coils of clay that after they're coiled in Donna and Daniel's places, they sort of turn the wheel on and sort of smooth out the coils, which is sort of a similar process to what I do. I'll put a coil on, then I'll beat it with a wooden paddle and an anvil, press it and shape it and dry it, and then I'll turn the wheel on and sort of roll it and smooth it out.
Is that because you just can't throw something that big? It's just too stiff?
You can, but it'd be heavy, you'd have to come back and trim it out later, and like in the case of like Daniel's here, it'd be really hard to reach your arm all the way down to the bottom of that, so yeah.
Gotcha.
And once you learn the technique, it's actually much easier to do. I mean, there's a learning curve where it seems really difficult at first, but once you have a process worked out, it's quite doable. And there's no limit to what size pots you can make. I mean, you can make lots of sizes in this room. So Daniel makes a lot of big pots. Daniel went to study in Thailand a couple of years ago, so the technique that he uses is a little bit different. You know, it would have been related to what you saw there in Thailand. This pot over here was actually made by Daniel's wife, Kate. And so it would be made with the same kind of process, I think, which Kate's known for spending a lot of time decorating her work. So this pot would, again, it would be slip decorated, where it would be covered in slip, and then she would draw the pattern on and carve away certain areas of the slip, add a different color slip, do more carving, finally do glazing at the end. So it's actually a very time-consuming piece.
So she threw the pot, Daniel?
Excuse me?
She threw the pot.
Yeah, and she's also a very physically small person and has no trouble making very large
Is
pots.
she Johnson? Just because I can't see that. Is she John?
Yeah,
Does she?
I think
Yeah,
Johnson?
they're married.
Yeah, so Kate and Daniel are husband and
So
wife.
that was what I was asking. Yeah.
Her is like 2 years.
These red pots, this is sort of a grouping of red pots. I think Annie really wanted to have as much color in this room as possible, and oftentimes pottery is dark and heavy, and so we really wanted to have some pots in here. This one is by Susan Philly. She's a Chapel Hill potter, and it would be that kind of red is a copper glaze, and that is by the Magnums. Robin Magnum. And that also would be a copper glaze. Copper is one of the main glazes potters use for getting red in glazes. And it also depends on the atmosphere inside the kiln. You have to have a reduced atmosphere to get copper to turn red. And when I say reduced, it's where you cut back on the amount of oxygen that's in the kiln. And it sort of changes chemically the glaze materials. If you would have had a clear, efficient burning kiln, the copper would turn green instead of red. Those are sort of the two colors you get from copper: is green in oxidation and red in reduction. This pot, yes?
Just to be clear, this refers to this, and this refers to this, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
As we go around, it's a little difficult to figure out who was
Yeah,
where.
I haven't really checked out the labeling yet, but
Yeah, it is. It's a little,
Oh.
and I think it's because of the nature of
Right.
the spiral design.
But it's good to know it so that when we.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I haven't checked all that out yet. Like, I think
So Carlos,
in
this
the
this
last-
label goes to that time.
Thank you very much.
in the last installation, there was one round area over there where there were a number of big pots, and one of them got broken at one point during the run of the show. So that was, I think Annie was really concerned about that, so I think that was part of the reason for having this barrier here, and then also part of the reason to have this extra level here, so people, I mean, you could touch that, but most people aren't gonna.
Right.
That's your job. That's part of your job. I
When
guess.
you bend over, that's a balance. Definitely go.
The Chinese have some old pottery that's kind of that red. Is that the same technique?
Yep, same technique. Anyways, we sort of thought that since most of the pots in the room are round, and having like a round display and an oval with curves is more appropriate than just having square pedestals and square screens and all these things. So it looks like pots are in cages.
Well, it looks like they're on
impure state where you water, grind up, and most potters buy all mills. Yes. Anyways, this pot is made by another friend and neighbor of mine, Fred Johnson, and it's made with cadmium, which is one of the other ingredients people can use to make orange or red pots. And Fred came up with that glaze when he was doing some research on sort of the art pottery era North Carolina pots. That was a famous glaze used in the 20s and 30s. So he actually found some of the, I think it's also chrome. It's chrome and cadmium. He found some of the original materials and sort of recreated this glaze. The glaze is actually, historically, it's called chrome red, but it's actually orange. And it would also have some lead in it. So it would not be a pot you'd want to drink out of.
Fred Jones,
So Fred Johnston is the husband of Carol Jim Tibbets, who made this rabbit.
wow.
You know, so I don't know if those kind of sort of personal connections are things that visitors would be interested in. I think so. Yeah, I think with Daniel and Kate, it's a pretty obvious similarity. With Fred and Carol, they work pretty much independently, even though they're in the same building together. So I think a lot of the great potters in North Carolina today are working as couples. Yeah, there's quite a few of them that are at the top of the field. I think there's a couple others we need to talk in here. So this pot, this four-handled pot would be from Mac Jones, who lives out west. Yeah, Sandy Mush, North Carolina, which is west of Nashville somewhere. The glaze on that would be what we call an alkaline glaze. So again, it would be a combination of wood ashes, feldspar, and clay. The drips on the handles were made by putting small pieces of glass right there, and glass will melt at a certain temperature. It was sort of a Catawba Valley technique. I think the old Catawba Valley potters put glass on their handles to sort of give them an extra strength so they wouldn't get knocked off after, during use. Kim Ellington's jug in the corner also has glass on the handle. So I think those two pots are sort of related. Yeah, Matt's pot, in a way, was sort of paired up with these two pots because they're all, Matt's pot has 4 handles. These two have 3 handles. Anyways, this pair of pots is sort of related because they're both 3-handled vases. So this one is by my neighbor, Ben Owen III, who comes from a long line of Seagrove potters, and this one is by another neighbor and friend, Bruce Golson. And so I know both these guys really well. So a lot of these glazes in this room here, we've talked about them. They involve just a mixture of clay and feldspar and things like iron and copper. They're pretty common glazes. If you ask potters for a glaze like that, we easily share it amongst ourselves. And it's not even necessary because these glazes are all published in books and you can get them online. Now, Bruce's glaze and Ben's glaze here are a different beast altogether. I mean, these are really personal glazes that they both would have worked hundreds and hundreds of hours over the course of many, many years testing these glazes. So they're not normal. So Ben's glaze, I don't know exactly what's in this glaze, although I'm pretty sure it has titanium in it. So titanium is also often known for this sort of crystal effects. I think many people are familiar with zinc crystal or crystalline pottery. That's the porcelain pottery that looks sort of like snowflakes. It's pretty common, pretty easy to make nowadays. I mean, these glazes are much more difficult to make. And there would also be a cooling component to this where you would fire the kiln up to top temperature, and then let it drop down to a certain temperature, then sort of hold it there. And that's what gives time for these crystals to grow in glazes. And the same is true with Bruce Golson's pot here. So the material that, the significant material that Bruce is using is molybdenum. Let's see, how would you spell that? Molybdenum, L-A-M, G, it's like D-E-A-U-M, molybdenum. I mean, it's very unusual glaze material. It's actually a glaze that would have been developed by the French art potters at the end of the 1800s. There's actually a really great example of this glaze down in one of the other rooms here in the Mint, made by one of the French art potters that we originally were thinking about pairing with this pot, but I guess we didn't want to disturb the pots that were already in other places in the museum. Anyways, so that glaze, I mean, it's really, it's only been in existence for 100 years or more, and I'm only aware of a couple, like a dozen or so people that have ever mastered that molybdenum glaze. So it's an incredible achievement. It's a very, very rare glaze, and it represents just endless hours of testing and firing, and taking notes, and doing it all again. So it's just, so yeah, if people ask about those two pots, it's about the glaze on those two. I mean, they're great forms too.
Wasn't Ben Owen also instrumental in having the red colored pots
Yeah, Ben makes a number of different kinds of red pots. He would make these copper pots sometimes, and then he also makes cadmium red, which is the really bright, like the fire engine red. I think there was one of those pots in this room. Yeah, yeah, I mean, Ben's known for a lot of different glazes, as Bruce is too. They're both sort of glaze masters. But, even that these glazes are really spectacular, you have to have a good shape. You have to have good form first, because even if you have the most beautiful glaze in the world, if it's on a lousy form, it's going to be a lousy pot. I talked a lot about glaze on those two pieces, but they're both really great shapes too. And that's it's known for sometimes the crystals are sort of like five-sided stars. There's a couple other Bruce's pots in the collection that show that more clearly. There was a teapot in the last exhibition, but it had been in this room for 5 years, and we wanted to use something. Anyways, I think we've covered all the pots now. Like these African pots, so they're. I mean, you can see this one's really interesting to me because of all the small chips on it. I mean, these were pots that were actually used, and they're not that old. See, what they say, 20th century. So this pot is less than 100 years old. It would have been used a lot. I mean, it might raise some eyebrows on some of your visitors why you put in a pot with all kinds of chips on it in the museum exhibition, but for some reason the chips don't bother me at all. In fact, they said I add to the presence somehow. Anyways, I think I've covered all the pots. Are there any other questions anybody has? Or?
Are designs on the African pots particularly related to place or person?
I am not an expert on that. I mean, I think obviously they're all geometric designs. I don't know.
Michelle, do you know?
What I've recently read is that particular type of design is representative of the scarification designs used in a village as a symbol of beauty or power. They transferred them onto their pots.
Yeah, there's some reference to that in the Chris Gavin.
Yeah, I think there is actually.
Yeah, I mean, these pots, I think they were functional. I think actually these both were probably beer pots. It doesn't say here, but I think they were both made for brewing beer. And there would have been African pots that wouldn't have all this patterning on them too, So I'm thinking these pots were, if not ceremonial, in some ways special.
Special.
to help,
Yep, let's talk
help us talk
yeah,
about the firing process.
So these African pots would have been made outside pit fire kilns, where it was just basically a hole in the ground that they would fill full of different kinds of wood and vegetation and light on fire. They would be very quick firing, so the clay actually would have to be tempered with like sand or some other material where it could stand that thermal shock. So they would be fired really within the matter of just a couple hours or something like that. And there's no applied glaze to these pots. Some of them, I think this one in particular, right when they pull them out of the fire, when they're still hot, they'll throw leaves or vegetable oil on them, and that sort of, steams on the hot pot, and it sort of seals up the surface. It makes it hold water better. And it also gives them a little bit of shine as well. Kate and Daniel's pot, Matt's pot, Donna's pot, they're all salt glaze pots. So they would have been related to the first pot that I spoke about, Kyle Carpenter, where you just throw regular salt into the kiln. Kyle's pot was actually made in a gas kiln. The rest of these would be made in a wood kiln. So like Kate and Daniel had a kiln, it's the size of a school bus. It's as long as this room. They have hundreds and hundreds of pots in there at one time. Not all big ones, The firing process might take a couple of days. Josh Copus, this pot's also a wood-fired pot. He does not add salt to his kiln, so you can see the surface is it's more matte. It's not as shiny. There's certain parts of this pot would have been probably towards the floor of the kiln, because you can sort of see the roughened, almost unburnt wood-ash surface. So that would have been, that pot basically would have been buried in a pile of embers at sort of towards the end of the fire. And then maybe he would have let those embers burn down, and then bury it again, burn down, like multiple process. So, yeah, probably out of all the pots in the room, this is the one that's probably more similar to what I'm doing. He's a good friend and ex-student.
When you talk about the salt glaze, is that just thrown into the fire?
Yep,
Or it's
you can
not
throw
thrown
it
on the pot?
It's both. You can throw it into the main firebox and just let it go through the kiln naturally. Some kilns have holes in the top where you drop it in. Most contemporary potters, I think Daniel and Kate, are blowing it into the kiln with a leaf blower. So there's different ways. Salt glazing was invented in Germany maybe about 500 years ago, then spread throughout the rest of Europe and England, and then came to America in colonial times. Starting with the New England potters in New York and Philadelphia, and then when those potters came down through the Shenandoah Valley and ended up in North Carolina, they found clays in the Seagrove area that were just perfect for salt glazing. And that's why the Seagrove community has a tradition of salt glazing, whereas the German potters that came down the Shenandoah Valley and ended up in the Catawba Valley, that clay doesn't take salt. So that's why they had to invent this ash glaze, alkaline glaze.
So what's different about the clay then?
Sorry?
What's different about the clay?
A good salt glazing clay has to have a lot of silica in it, because silica is the ingredient that combines with the salt.
It adheres,
Yes.
attracts the
chemically,
salt.
yeah, chemically attracts it.
So it's like, is that sand?
Silica, sand is one source of silica.
I'm just curious. So if I pick a puck clay, it's kind of sandy gritty, then that would probably.
That would be sand. It could be other kinds of grit in the clay, but it's probably sand. Yeah. You can buy bags of sand now. It's pretty clean and pure. I think some of the great skills that the early pioneer North Carolina potters had would be to actually go out in the wilderness and be able to find materials, to be able to follow veins of clay all the way down the Shenandoah Valley into North Carolina. They knew how to do that. They knew how to identify feldspar, clay, just different rocks they would see along their
So I can't just dig up a hunk of dirt in my backyard and.
You can try. You do live in North Carolina, particularly in my area where I live in Seagrove. If you have more than just a couple acres of land, you have red clay and you have yellow clay, for sure. The white clay is a little bit harder to find. It's often underneath the yellow clay.
Yeah, I think we have all the red stuff, don't we?
But there's a lot of contemporary potters. I think Covis in particular, myself and others are really involved in what we call wild clays, which are just clays that we go out and dig out of nature. So I think in a lot of ways we're trying to relearn some of this knowledge that these old potters had about finding their own materials.
I think they can read the land and the terrain and.
Yeah, I think the old potters had a lot of the skills like farmers do.
Yeah.
And this process where you have huge wood kilns and you're only firing them a couple times a year, it's a lot like farming. Where you plant in the spring and you work for 6 months and you harvest a couple times a year. It's a lot like that.
Necessity, they had to get their own things to eat with.
Let's see. Oh, kilns, yeah, so.
Our light down the street.
Like Bruce's pot, being glazed, that would be glazed in just a simple electric kiln. So in this case, it's not about having a fancy big wood fire kiln. It's just a simple electric kiln where there's no moving heat inside the kiln. It's just temperature. It's just a very controlled temperature. So it's not about controlling the fire so much. It's about the glaze testing.
And that's an effect that couldn't be achieved if it was in a wood fire kiln.
No, not really.
Not successful.
The changing temperatures
I
of
mean, you can put it in one of these saggers that we
Yeah.
talk about.
Here, if you're using a wood fire.
Yeah, so there's quite a few wood-fired pots in the room. Like these two copper pots, they would have been fired in a gas kiln. So to get this reduction atmosphere in the kiln, you almost need some kind of fuel like gas or wood, where you can put more fuel into the kiln than what it needs, and it makes a smoky atmosphere. So it's so hard to do that in an electric kiln because there's no chimney or vent in an electric kiln. It's just a sealed environment. There's ways you can do it. You can throw little sticks in there and it wears out the kiln. Let's see. Yeah, like the old Chinese pots, they would have been fired in gigantic chamber kilns that would have been, twice as long as this room, where there would have been thousands and thousands of pots. It would be, it would take a village to make pots like that. You can see why that kind of wood kiln was so developed during feudal times, because it would just it requires just a lot of physical labor. And for us nowadays, when we have big kilns, my kiln, I have several kilns that are about as long as this room, and it's all about teamwork. So like Ben or Bruce or Daniel or Fred, they all come help me fire in the kiln, and then when they fire, I go help them. We also put a little bit of work in each other's kiln, and sort of instead of just paying each other, we sort of trade a little bit of kiln space for stoking time. In fact, all of us, or a couple of us, are all working towards firing Ben Owen's kiln here in a couple of weeks, because we're all working towards the same deadline. It's here at the Mint in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, we're all hoping for the best, as we always do. Yes?
I have a question with regards to this style of making this.
Yes.
This would be sculpted, it would just be a big blob of clay, and then she would sculpt it to look like this, and then it would be fired.
Yeah, no, Carol uses coils, and then like little slabs of clay. No, she's not starting out with a solid chunk.
Okay.
Like that thing is hollow. So it's hollow. It's built up. She would have to use props, like to get the ears to stay like that. She would have to have like some kind of support under the ears.
And the support is still in there. No, it's removed. The support is removed.
Yes, when it's like it might have had stayed in there through the fire. It definitely would have been there for the drying. Through the fire. The glazing part of this is really complicated. It requires multiple fires. there'd be one fire under it, just a clear white glaze. Then all these, the imagery on here is not hand drawn, it's stencils. So she might draw the stencil or draw the pattern, send it off to a stencil company, and they'll send back. Stencil's not the right
Transfer print.
Yeah, it's like transfer printing, where it's almost like these pieces of paper that have ceramic material on them. And she'll press them on there. Just like the kids put on Just like that. Excuse me,